Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next webinar for the CAS Virtual Showcase. So with me today, we've got Hayley Leonard, and she's the research manager from Raspberry Pi Foundation, and including many things that she does, one of her roles is the gender balance in computing work. So she's here to talk to you about that. Just to let you know, this is one of many sessions throughout the CAS Virtual Showcase. Do tweet out with the hashtag as well, and this session will be recorded and will be made available following this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you straight over to Hayley, who's going to take you through gender balance in computing. Thanks, Hayley.
Thank you. Hope you can all hear me okay and see me okay. Thanks so much for inviting me to take part in this. It's a bit weird because I can't see anybody, so I'm just talking to my screen. So I hope any questions that you have, if you put in the chat, I've got some points throughout the session just to stop and have a look at some of those questions and have a think. So yes, so I'm Hayley Leonard. I'm the research manager at the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Actually, my background is in psychology. I did developmental and educational psychology, and I'm sort of bringing that to my role here, but focusing it in on computing education. So it's really exciting. I'm talking today, as Pete said, I'm working on the gender balance in computing project, a research program at the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I'm not going to be talking specifically about that in this session, although I will talk to you a bit about it towards the end and show you, how you can find out more and sign up. This is more about the background research and the theory behind that has led us to the interventions that we've designed, but also trying to think as much as possible about how we can take some elements from that research and use it usefully within the classroom to help you improve gender balance in computing. Yes, an overview. Good. Okay, so I'm just going to start off in this session just giving a few stats, which you might already be aware of, but I think it just gives a good background to, what gender balance, what the gender ratio looks like in terms of computing qualifications and employment. And then I'm going to bring in some kind of psychology, educational theory to give some insight and to provide some basis of our discussion. And then I'm going to look at some specific elements of this, including social cultural factors that we think affect female students' attitudes towards computing, and then some more individual or psychological factors that affect their attitudes towards computing, and therefore the likelihood of them choosing the subject and careers involving computer science. So that's what it's going to look like. As I said, I've put some slots in for questions throughout, and we do have some polls which we've included at the end to avoid having to go backwards and forwards between the screen and the polls, and hopefully save a bit of time and a bit of kind of faffing about, basically. So, as I promised, some stats. I'm sure many of you have seen the Roehampton report, but it showed that in 2017, only around 10 to 20% of females, only about 10 to 20% of students choosing GCSE and A-level computer science were female. And what's interesting is if you look at the university undergraduate data, from between 2016 and 2019, there was an increase in students taking computer science at undergraduate level, but within that increase, the proportion of female students stayed almost exactly the same, so it was 17 to 18%, and that's obviously very similar to the number taking GCSE and A-level. So this, might be what you expect, but it also highlights that if you don't get them at GCSE and A-level, they're not going through that pipeline into undergraduate studies. They don't suddenly take it if they haven't taken it at earlier levels. And just thinking about how that moves into careers, there's an European Commission scheme called the Women in Digital Scorecard. And if you look at the 2019 one, so it's the last one they did, it reports that in the UK, around 17% of technology specialists are female. So this isn't necessarily computer scientists, but it's people who are specialists in using technology in their jobs. So again, it's a very similar number. So this pipeline is pretty much what it is. It's between 10 and 20%. And interestingly, the scorecards for all the EU countries, it looks very similar to most of the other countries. And we also know that this is an issue that's not just in Europe, but in the US, in Australia, around the world. So really 17 to 18%, or between 10 and 20%, is not a lot of females within these professions and within these qualifications. So we want to think about how to increase that percentage. So as I said, I want to draw on a psychology educational theory called expectancy value theory, which is made up, not unsurprisingly, of expectancies and values, and it's expected that, and it's proposed that these things predict persistence in a particular subject, also predict your performance or achievement in that subject, and subsequently your subject and career choice. So expectancies are really how well you believe you will do in a particular subject or a future career. And values are quite complicated. There's quite a few things involved. Some of the things are how important you think it is to do well in that task, and that can be how important you think it is for your future career, or how important your parents think it is because they want you to do a particular career, and so on. It can also relate to your enjoyment of it and your interest in that particular subject, how useful you think it will be for your future plans, and also what cost there is to taking it. So what do you have to give up in order to take that subject, or to spend time learning that subject? How much effort does it take? So within these, there are kind of individual psychological factors and also some more social cultural factors. So one individual factor is perceptions of your own competence and the difficulty of the subject, and this can affect how well, we know that it can affect your persistence and also how well you perform, and therefore leads on to a problem with choosing it as a subject or career. As I already mentioned, your own goals, your own interest, and your own previous experiences of taking that subject can affect all of these things. And an important one, I think, for today, for teachers and educators, is your perceptions of others' attitudes and expectations. So if you think that your teacher doesn't expect you to do very well in this subject, then you perhaps persist less, your performance is worse, you don't choose it for a subject or career. If you're, again, as I said, if your parents have a particular view of whether that's worthwhile subject or not, that can also affect it. And then there's a sort of wider cultural and societal norms and expectations, which this can affect our individual perceptions. So if we, stereotypical views of who can take computer science, for example, can really affect your own values relating to that subject. So we're going to think about that one first, actually. So I hope that's all clear so far. So thinking about stereotypes, I think it's actually really important just to start with a definition, because I think we all know what stereotypes are, but it's important to highlight that from a child development perspective, stereotypes are very useful, because if you think about all the information that young children have to receive and process, being able to categorize things into prototypes and stereotypes is actually really important in helping them make sense of the world. But it's when those stereotypes aren't challenged as they grow up that these stereotypes can become a bad thing and actually result in prejudice, or some of the issues that we may be discussing today in terms of gender balance and stereotypical views of computer scientists. So a task that's been used a lot to look at stereotypes in science in general has been this draw a scientist task. And in this task, basically young children, or children between kindergarten and 12th grade actually, are asked to draw a scientist, and then those drawings are coded in relation to various aspects, either whether they're male or female, what they're wearing, what's in the environment around them, for example. And basically children's drawings of scientists have pretty much always been male dominated. But a recent meta-analysis has shown that in more recent years, there's been a bit more of a balance, more females being represented. But interestingly, this is more seen in younger children. And as children get older and into adolescence, they're still veering more towards a male picture. So children still seem to associate science with men more as they get older. So moving on to Draw a Computer Scientist, they've developed it specifically for computer science. And you can see this picture that's been taken from the study by Pantich. Should say all the studies I'm talking about are in the reference list in the end of the slides. So this picture was drawn. It says, I drew a crazy scientist. That is a computer in the background, just in case you can't read that. And so this study was done with 10 to 14-year-olds. And they drew a computer scientist, and then those drawings were coded in relation to different elements. And what came out of that study was essentially that 71% of the 10 to 14-year-olds showed a male computer scientist. They also showed computer scientists working alone, computer scientists using computers, thankfully, they got that bit of it. But there was also a bit of confusion, it seems. So like this picture, it's a scientist. They draw a picture of a scientist, which may include a lab coat and vials of chemicals and things like that, and there's also a computer. So there's a bit of a lack of understanding of what makes a computer scientist, as well as this gender imbalance that we're interested in. And just for fun, I did a Google search of computer scientist, and this is what came up. So what you can see is that the first 7 pictures on my screen, hopefully you can see, are all white males. The 8th one is a woman, and then if you go along a bit further, there's maybe 1 or 2 more women. So this really kind of backs up this stereotype that computer scientists are white males usually. So I wanted to talk a bit about some research that's been done into stereotypes and how they are transmitted to young people. Obviously, one way is through the media, through both news and through popular media. Obviously, you can see here the character from the IT crowd. And Google actually did a study to look at how characters who are computer scientists are actually presented and represented in TV and films. And they found very little representation actually overall. But those who were represented were almost, if not entirely, exclusively male, with the majority white, so supporting that stereotype we've just discussed. And in addition, they were mostly presented, they were very kind of scruffy, they didn't have romantic or family relationships, and they were really, really intelligent. So Google were actually working with TV and filmmakers to try to influence how computer scientists are presented on screen. So hopefully that's one way of approaching this stereotype and trying to address it. Some more research looked at the environment in which computer science happens in schools and in universities. And this particular picture is showing lots of posters on the wall. And they found that if girls were asked to go into a classroom where the posters on the wall were very kind of stereotypically male and very stereotypically what male computer scientists would be interested in, so things like science fiction and gaming, then they had much poorer attitudes towards computer science than girls who were in a more neutral environment. Something else I just wanted to point out from that picture, although there's no computers in it, you can see that it's set out in a very individual way. Individual seats, no sort of space for group work and so on. And so that also adds to the stereotype that computing can be a very solitary thing and doesn't involve interaction or working together. So maybe there's something to do with how we set out our environments, our labs, our computer labs, to encourage more of this group work, which we know is really important for computer science careers actually. and to sort of get rid of this stereotype that it's a lone person working on their own somewhere. And so the last thing I just wanted to talk about here was about role models. And I think one of the main things that people think about trying to reduce stereotypes is to provide role models of females who are working in computer science, who girls can see that there are females who work in computer science, so they could do it too. Now that's great, and we're going to talk a bit about how to choose good role models. But there is a problem if the role models that are chosen are too narrow. So one piece of research showed that if you had prospective undergraduates going to look at the computer science undergraduate course at university, and they got introduced to a female undergraduate student who was already studying it. If that female undergraduate student was very stereotypically a computer scientist, so showed lots of attributes that were stereotypically associated with computer science, that actually put girls off more. So it's interesting to think about, because obviously computer scientists are going to have a wide range of attributes. So, and some of them will be quite stereotypical. So it's not that you can't introduce that, but maybe you need to introduce a kind of more diverse range of computer scientists, and increasing the diversity will help them see that they can fit in different ways. And just linking this to some to a blog that was recently written by my colleague Catherine Childs, which is available on the Teach Computing website. And she actually asked some 7 to 15-year-old girls, admittedly their parents worked for the Raspberry Pi Foundation, but I still thought it was quite interesting. So I asked them who their role models were, and they chose a range of different sorts of people. So they chose some people from their immediate community, such as family members and teachers. They chose people from a wider community, such as people with aspirational skills and achievements. So, for example, one girl was really interested in photography, and she followed lots of YouTubers who showed how to do some cool things with photography. And they also chose some people in the public eye who were viewed as similar to them in some sort of attribute or goals. So this could be from people like Greta Thunberg to Taylor Swift. And there was a wide range of these sorts of people that these girls looked up to and saw as role models. And there's just a link to the blog post there. So in terms of how to address kind of social cultural barriers in school, these stereotypes of what a computer scientist is, the first thing is providing diverse representations of computer scientists and careers using and careers using computer science. And I've got a video down here. I don't think I'm actually going to have time to show it, but perhaps later. But it's something that you can find easily on code.org/girls. And it shows lots and lots of different careers, which include and talking about how they use computer science in those careers. And they have a diverse range of people talking about it as well. There are females, males, different races, ethnicities, and so on. And I think there's lots of talks and TED Talks and videos, YouTube videos that are provided by code.org//girls, which I think are really useful ways of providing diverse representations of computer scientists and computer science careers, which are really well worth looking up. I think something that came out of that blog was not assuming who is going to be a suitable role model, but actually asking and maybe having discussion about what makes a good role model with the young people, and responding to their ideas, because just increasing representation of females in computer science and showing them that there are some females there doesn't necessarily make a role model for them if they don't believe that they share any attributes with them. Again, thinking about communities rather than just individual people. So perhaps linking young people up with a group of people who have similar interests, or something like a code club or a coder dojo, or groups of people on social media and things like that. So a role model doesn't have to be one person. It can be a group of people. Okay. Yeah, so that's it. And as I said, looking at the at code.org girls is a really good resource for using there. So I was going to take a stop there because I've been talking for a while, and take any questions that you had. I also thought, if there weren't any questions, that we might perhaps have a bit of a discussion via the chat about if there were any other social cultural barriers that you can think of in your school, if you wanted to have a bit of a discussion about that at all. So I think Pete is going to take the questions, I hope.
Hi there, Hayley.
Hello.
I've answered some individual ones that have come through. One of the questions was, is there going to be the presentation going to be available at the end? And that's correct. We'll actually upload it at the end so that you can download it straight from GoToWebinar, but it'll also be sent out separately. So that's the only question so far.
Okay.
Just checking if any questions have come in for you. Here we go. Okay, so I've just got a couple of statements, but I've got, this is really interesting. I'm a primary teacher and I find out more girls turn up to my coding club every week. So there's some great stuff going on. We've got being the only girl in the class is a common issue as well. So we've got some, you know, very contrasting areas. We've got a direct question for you. In fact, we've got loads of questions coming in now. One of the questions is, are there any resources for younger learners? And that's from David.
Instead of the role, I think the role models stuff on the code.org website, I think is just as relevant for the younger learners and the older learners. In terms of good pedagogy and things that can improve girls' engagement, that's part of one of our trials in the gender balancing computing project. We are working with both primary and secondary schools, so I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. Maybe that would be better a bit towards the end. And also, obviously, the resource repository that's available through the NCCE from Raspberry Pi Foundation is producing lessons and lesson plans which aim to include all of these best practice ideas, and that they're all freely available through the Teach Computing website as well for younger and older children. But I'm certainly happy to talk a bit more about the trials that we're doing later, if that answers that question.
Great, thanks, Hayley. There's just another one here, which is, this is from Martins. It says, in my research, found that girls are more likely to choose computer science if there's more structure to their work. Just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got, again, actually, I have a bit more about that a bit later in the talk in thinking about structuring work and more pedagogical things. But I think I agree that might be, that's what seems to come out of some of the research, that girls a kind of a focus on knowing what's coming next rather than and being able to explore things a bit within a structure really helps them kind of build their confidence. So I would agree with that. But again, as I said, I'll have a bit more about that a bit later on.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Hayley. I'll let you carry on.
That's right. Nice. Thank you for asking some great questions as well. And sorry, I've sort of answered them by saying I'm going to talk about that later, but I hope that that's okay. I definitely want a bit more of a discussion about those things. Okay, so there we go. Something that sort of came up there from one of those statements as well is like being the only girl in a class or in a group. In primary school, you know, you can have single sex groups. You might group all your girls together, or rather than having mixed groups. And so it could be thought that perhaps, you know, if you have an all-girls school, then there's obviously going to be more representation of girls taking computer science GCSE and A-level than potentially in a mixed sex school where you might see it's a majority boys and it kind of puts some girls off. So I wanted to look a little bit at the literature there, and it's still thinking about this sort of social cultural environment, but it's now more within a school rather than in the wider community. So most of the research that's been done on single versus mixed sex schooling is in lots of other subjects. I mean, most of the research that's been done in general is in lots of other subjects. because computer science is so relatively new. But essentially the findings are quite mixed in terms of how well girls learn in single-sex schools. Some say it's better than in mixed sex, and some say that it's worse. So it's very mixed. I don't think there's any categorical outcome that has been found here. And in particular, what we're interested in here is choosing a particular subject or choosing a particular career. And single-sex or mixed-sex schooling doesn't seem to affect it based on the literature. It may feel different in everyday teaching life. In terms of computer science specifically, again, there's still mixed findings in terms of subject or career choice for girls in single-sex schools. So a recent paper by Peter Kemp has shown that girls are more likely to take computer science in an all-girls school, but this is kind of confounded by the factor that actually more all-girls schools offer it than mixed-sex schools. And there's lots of kind of nuance in the findings in all of this. So girls tend to look like they outperform boys when they do take computer science. And this is actually something that's quite often cited. But actually, if you take into account their achievement in other subjects, that difference no longer exists. So what you're seeing really is high achieving girls taking computer science. Which is why they might look like they're outperforming boys. But in comparison to their other marks, computer science might be one of their lower marks. So that's interesting to think about if you're thinking about choice of subject. If they're really high achieving and they're doing really well in all their other subjects, but they get a lower mark in computer sciences, are they going to be put off taking it? It's part of this idea of the cost of taking a particular subject. It's also important to think about how gender interacts with lots of other factors. So one thing that the paper by Kemp and colleagues found was that girls from more disadvantaged backgrounds were more likely to take computer science than girls from those with higher socioeconomic status. But for boys, it was the opposite direction. So the high SES boys were more likely to take computer science than the more disadvantaged boys. So again, there's this kind of interaction of different things. One thing that I always think is quite interesting is a suggestion that maybe if you put girls in an all-girl group or in an all-girls school, or boys for that matter, if you make single-sex groups, does this actually encourage more stereotypical behaviour and a reduction in the sort of more centralization of the values of that group? You know, do girls become more girly and boys become more kind of male, stereotypically male? And so that might be the basis of some of the mixed findings, is that perhaps it actually increases stereotypical views rather than reduces them. And part of the problem here and throughout, which I meant to say at the beginning, was talking about gender. Obviously, the research has really focused on male and female biological sex, and you know there's a wider view of gender, and also we're thinking about all girls being stereotypically girl-like and all boys being stereotypically boy-like, and there will be lots of individuals that don't fit those stereotypes. But what I think is important, that probably implementing some of these changes or thinking about some of these issues can help all of those people. It's not just going to help girls become more engaged, but could help girls and boys who are non-stereotypical as well. Okay, so I just wanted to link that back to expectancy value here, the value theory here, and start thinking less of the cultural and societal issues and thinking a bit more about those individual psychological factors. So we know that perceptions of your self-efficacy or perceptions of your competence have a big impact on motivation and on performance. And we've also sort of briefly discussed how perceptions of how others value or how others think of you can really affect that as well, particularly in terms of subject and career choice. So I wanted to talk to you about a really interesting study which was conducted by Mike Younger in 2012 to 2013 with the Girls' Day School Trust, which is a number of single-sex girls' schools. It didn't focus specifically on computing, but it has some really interesting suggestions about and implications for increasing girls' engagement in lots of different subjects. And I feel like they really work for computer science and for computing lower down. And it links a bit to what I was talking about in terms of pedagogy and having a structure. So this study included interviews and observations, so with both the girls, the young people, and also their teachers. And what came out of it was that when they were spoken to or observed, there weren't any explicit strategies that were used specifically for girls. And they hadn't changed the curriculum content at all because they were teaching girls. But what emerged was that there was some sort of implicit understanding that, or kind of unconscious strategies that girls in their classes actually required a bit more time to explore tasks within a clear structure, actually. A bit more reassurance. So girls were often not very confident in their understanding. And sometimes this led to them asking lots more questions, so that time to explore was required to answer these different questions. But also sometimes meant that they didn't speak up at all. So that required the teacher to kind of take more of a challenging role, trying to get them to show their understanding in different ways, rather than just relying on them to put their hand up if they didn't understand. Something that was really interesting that came out was this encouragement to take risks and get things wrong. What sort of came out was that they were very loath to get anything wrong. And in terms of computer science, that's obviously a problem. Debugging is a major factor, a major thing that you have to do. And so being able to be encouraged to take these risks within a sort of safe environment and not worry about getting things wrong was really important. And something that I thought was really interesting that came out was that they talked about comparison to when they linked up with an all-boys school to do a task, not in computer science, but just in general. And they felt that boys were much more likely to just kind of go head on and get on with something and take risks, whereas girls wanted to plan a bit more, so as you said before, use a bit more structure and try to minimize the taking risks and getting things wrong. They also felt that they needed a bit more support to persist when they did get things wrong or when they were finding something difficult. Now, it might be that in a single-sex classroom or in a single-sex group, it is a bit easier to adapt to these different things that have come out. If you have both boys and girls in a room, then maybe it's a bit more difficult to deal with those competing needs. But it could be that you could actually use any of these differences that you sort of unconsciously feel are occurring, because addressing them would actually benefit both boys and girls. So if you see encouraging girls to take a few more risks, but also encouraging boys to think through their ideas more carefully. So if you're thinking about these different areas that you can intervene in, that they should help both boys and girls to improve and to help them stay engaged with a particular subject. So, and yeah, something that really came out was can't see the bottom of my screen, that's okay. Was this importance of having high expectations for the girls, but also for all your pupils, obviously, but also really providing that support and that ability to explore. So some of the recommendations that came out of that, which I think are really useful and beneficial for computer science, is thinking about interactivity and a focus on talking and questioning, discussion. What came out of this was that it didn't, for the girls to have to feel more engaged, it didn't require them, this interactivity didn't mean that they had to do loads and loads of activities, because actually that became quite stressful. They didn't feel they had time to explore, but it just meant making each of those activities a bit longer to allow that exploration time and that questioning and discussion. And also the teacher being able to offer multiple explanations of the same thing in different ways, to really help that understanding and reassurance for the girls' understanding. And one thing that was really interesting was this idea of challenging pupils to teach each other. Because as we all know, you never really understand anything until you actually have to teach it to somebody else. So encouraging them helped them to think through any issues that they had, and reassured them in their own understanding. And the other main thing that came out, which again I think is really important for computer science, is this idea of collaboration, particularly collaborative problem solving. So one thing that you can do is to challenge students to take on different roles within groups. So, you might have the leader who decides what you're going to focus on. You might have the programmer who actually does the physical programming, someone who's doing some design work, and so on. But the important point is to then make them swap these roles, so that either within a task or across different tasks, to really challenge their skills and make sure that they don't just kind of do the bit that they're confident in, but that they have to develop across those different elements, and show how important teamwork is, that somebody might have relatively better skills in one area and someone in another, and you can develop and work on those together. And that really means that communication between students improves. And we know that that's really important when you're using computer science in careers, that you're not working on your own, you tend to be working in groups. So I think that that's a really important point. So I wondered if there are any more questions there. I was just going to open it up again there just a little bit before the end. And also that discussion point, again, if there weren't any questions about whether you had any experiences that you think were useful in terms of single-sex schools, or just in working in all-girl groups.
Hi Hayley, it's really weird.
Hello.
I just pop up randomly when the questions come up. Hiya, how you doing? Okay, so I've got some questions in here, which there's quite a few questions coming through for you actually. So kind of a more statement, but sort of a question as well. So we've got fear of failure. Could this be worked on a cross-curricular issue, as it will occur in other subjects? That's from Amy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just answer that very quickly. Absolutely, and I think certainly this study that I've just been talking about it's not based on computer science. It's based on a wide range of subjects, just teaching in general. And I completely agree that a lot of the things that need to be done in computer science can be done curricularly, and doing that is going to mean you have the best form of success. I think doing anything for one subject individually is quite often tricky. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Great, thank you. So we've also got, here we go. So one thing we can do to help with the fear of failure is to get students to keep an error log. We celebrate mistakes that are made, rewarding students when they make lots of mistakes. That's from Martin.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think also, just to add to that, to then put in how they solved them, so that and if you share that across your students as well, firstly, it means that some people might not make those mistakes because they've seen how someone else has solved them, or if they are stuck, they could go and see how they could be solved. So again, it's increasing this idea of working as a team. I think that's that sort of gets at two things really.
Right, and there's a really interesting one here as well coming from Matt. So this is, I work in a girls' school. Before lockdown, I've been doing lots of work on collaboration, and I've really started to notice the shift in engagement, and it was really positive for my pupils. So that's an interesting one.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Well, and when I get on to talking about the gender balancing computing project, that is part of one of our interventions. It's thinking about collaboration and so on. So that's great to hear that it's working in practice already.
Great, thank you. That's
okay,
good.
that's all. Okay, fab.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. I'll go on to just finish off now. Let's click on the. Okay, so back to this darned theory. All I really wanted to say now is, while we've sort of seen that each of these different areas is really important, and actually you could focus in some interventions on any one of them, what's really important to remember is that they really interact with each other. So if you have relatively low self-efficacy or perceptions of your own competence, you might still persist in a subject if you're really interested in trying to solve a particular problem. So it links to your goals, really. Or if your parents or your teachers provide lots of encouragement and you feel that those people value that and think that you can do it. So that's how that can interact. You might have a really high interest in a subject, but the culture that you grow up in actually doesn't value that particular activity, or it has really stereotypical views of who can do it, and so that might stop you even though you have a very high level of interest. So it's really important to think about how these things interact, and important that although you might do some individual interventions that can address each of those, the best thing is when we have kind of multifaceted interventions that can kind of deal with a lot of those things at once, or just you do lots of interventions against lots of different things, so that you can deal with all of them, or as many of them as you can. There's not going to be one silver bullet that is going to improve gender balance immediately. So to summarize what I've talked about so far, there's obviously a range of interacting factors that can affect with whether students choose to do computer science as a subject or as a career. And really most of the research on girls' engagement has been to do with STEM more widely and not to do with computer science. As I said, computer science is relatively new. So what we really need is a lot more focused and thorough investigation on what factors are affecting gender balance in computing specifically. As I said, it's really good if you can do things that are cross-curricular that increase engagement, but we do also need to know if there's things about computing in particular that we can really help and really focus on. So the Gender Balance in Computing project. We started running it last year. Obviously, we then had school closures, so we're due to get going again at some point, yet to be fully agreed on. But we're working with 15,000 students, hundreds of schools, and we have a range of different interventions, some looking at role models, looking at real-world problem solving, looking at pedagogy, and also looking at non-formal learning, so things to do with code clubs and so on. So this is where you can sign up to find out more about the schools network. So if you join the schools network, you'll find out more about the different interventions and how to take part. So that's the NCCEO/GBIC register link. We've also, over the school closures, been producing some blogs on gender balance written by my colleague, Catherine Childs. So one of those I spoke about already, about role models. There's also one on real world applications. And then the next one, which is due to come out next week, is on non-formal learning. And there's another 3 to come over the summer. So you might want to go and check those out. And if you're interested in research in general, not necessarily just based around gender balance, we've got our research seminars that are taking place online, which have been taking place for the last couple of months. They take place on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. And we do have one specifically on gender balance and looking at the literature and what the literature says in terms of gender balance in computing, also delivered by Catherine Childs. So that's in a few weeks. So you can, if you go to that link, that gives the list and it also tells you how to join and things like that. So I think that's the end of my advertising segment. But thank you very much for listening, and I can take some, I think we've got some time for a few more questions if there were any, or any more comments that you wanted me to respond to.
Okay, Hayley, thanks for that. That's really good. It's a great project to get involved with for sure. Do you know when we might get some further details on the project, what it might look like?
Yeah, if you join the schools network, there there's also a blog post, explainer post that explains what the different interventions are about. But that's all. If you join that network, then you'll get all of the information about it. And we hope to be starting to recruit again in the next academic year. So we'll be able to highlight to everyone which interventions they're eligible for and so on.
Okay, great. I think you've answered most of the questions with that, actually, Hayley. Most of them have been popping in about that exact how to get involved. There's a question from Sarah, who wanted to come back to it. It says, one of the issues we face in schools at the moment is mounting pressure for traditional teaching styles. It says, I love collaboration, but the research apparently shows that outcomes are less good. Do we need more research? And that's from Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the research definitely doesn't show that. So, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, certainly a lot of the stuff on collaboration that's the basis of some of our interventions in terms of the teaching approaches in particular, where we're really trying to increase collaboration, has been based on other subjects because there's not evidence for it as much in computer science. But in other subjects, other STEM subjects, it's really helped with female engagement and subject and career choice. So yeah, I mean, I don't know which research is showing the opposite. Obviously, when research is conducted, there's always going to be some that say it works and some that say it doesn't, and it's very much the difficulty is, as a teacher, I know I should say I used to be a primary school teacher, is that deciding, but trying to be critical and working out which ones are most useful for you to rely on. And I know that's the problem, and I'm hoping that through our interventions we're going to we'll be providing resources for you to use. We'll be doing things with you that will hopefully help you make sense of that research and implement it in the classroom.
Great, that's excellent, and really it's just an overwhelming thank you for how useful this session has been, Hayley. It's been absolutely brilliant. So there's loads of fantastic comments in there about how much people have enjoyed it, which is absolutely brilliant. What we'll do is we will obviously make the slides available. They'll come straight to you after this, and there'll be a recording as well that will be sent over to you.
Fantastic.
Hayley, we had a couple of polls. Do we want to put any of the polls up? What do you think, just to finish off?
We can do, yeah. It'd be interesting to see the difference between.
Just because
go on.
Because I'm just excited to do a poll and I haven't done one yet. So can I just put one in? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just pick one. I'm going to pick the last one because it's relevant to both primary and secondary. So I'm just going to put a poll up on your screen, everyone, for you to engage with.
It's really funny because I can't see what's going on.
No, I've got it on my screen. I think I've just got to cancel it and then we carry on. So just getting the votes. So we've got 84% of votes. So those of you who haven't got involved, if you can, to get involved, that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you everyone for that. That is great.
What was the result?
The result is 70% say yes, 10% say no, and 20% say not sure. Nice rounded percentages there for us to work on. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we've got lots of information about the different interventions. If you go to that website for the Gender Balance in Computing, or you can always contact me at the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Actually, I should tell you, I haven't got it in the slide, but if you have specific questions that aren't covered by the explainer post and things like that, then you can email gender research, all one word, gender research @raspberrypi.org. And that you should be able to get a response from one of us about it. But hopefully you'll be able to get as much information as you need.
Okay, great. Hey, maybe I'll put that email out when the slides go out as well, so they've got hold of that.
Brilliant.
Great.
That's great. Okay, thanks very much.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Hayley. That's absolutely brilliant. So thank you for joining us, and don't forget there are more sessions coming up on the CAS Virtual Showcase. Just type in CAS Virtual Showcase into Google and you'll see a whole list of further presentations coming up. So thank you all.